Dear Westminster Councillors, you have inherited an unpopular, unsuccessful, incredibly expensive and harmful policy from your predecessors. Worse, I'm pretty sure that the people managing that policy are intentionally lying to you. I've spent the last month going through the 114-page report titled Busking and Street Entertainment Licensing Policy Review Report. It was drafted in order for you to debate in October. Unfortunately, I believe that it contains multiple demonstrable lies and distortions. The report's executive summary says that during the 2 years of operation, there was a notable increase in complaints related to busking. That's its basic message. Complaints about street performers have gone up. Here's how the newspapers covered the report. Buskers face West End crackdown as complaints rise. Crackdown on buskers after thousands of noise complaints. Crackdown on buskers after noise complaints skyrocket. But this is based on a total misrepresentation of the facts. Here's a chart in the report that shows the total number of complaints in the borough over the last 4 years. It clearly demonstrates that after 2 relatively stable years, complaints visibly shot up in 2021 and are still really high in 2022. That chart is lying. It shows that between April and December 2019, buskers received 959 complaints. But we have the raw complaints from earlier Freedom of Information requests. The real figure during those months is 1,693 complaints, a 77% increase on what's shown, and, importantly, higher than the complaints that the council claims buskers received in 2022. No other chart in the entire document lays out pre-license and post-license complaints, so this is the only graphic in the report showing a visual representation of whether complaints have gone up or down, and it's lying. But the misrepresentation is way worse and goes far further than a single graphic. It's clear that there was a spike in 2021. Helpfully, the council, eventually, gives 3 reasons why complaints might have gone up that year, which have nothing to do with the buskers. First, they admit that an expectation was established when the scheme was introduced that the council would have the resources to actively ensure compliance. In other words, if people thought their complaints would mean more, they'd be more likely to complain. They also admit that the council has also made it easier for residents and businesses to report complaints, so a higher percentage of those who wanted to complain would actually go through with it. Third, COVID was a factor. Since they'd been deathly quiet during lockdowns, once they ended, the return of activity that generated any noise could have given rise to additional complaints at the time. But that's not the only thing that COVID changed. The council should have gone on to mention that in 2021 a lot more people were working from home, right next to the pitch. Businesses near pitches, actually businesses nationwide, were being told to keep their windows open, letting air out and, obviously, sound in. But perhaps more than anything else, the consultation itself, by way of the council going around and speaking to locals, acted as an advertisement for the complaint system. The rise in 2021 might simply have been because suddenly people had discovered that there was a complaint system. So more people knew how to complain, it was easier to complain, people were more likely to complain. COVID forced people to work from home, businesses to open their windows, and had created temporary silence that suddenly ended in 2021. Any discussion about the complaints data that doesn't start with all that context is borderline fraudulent. It's definitely bad science. But once you've seen how much complaints have reduced since 2021, it looks highly suspect for the council to ignore all that. Here's how they begin talking about complaints. Since the introduction of the scheme, the council has received 5,070 complaints within the period of April 21 to May 2023. On average, the council receives around 2,200 complaints per year relating to buskers and street entertainers. They don't spell it out for you, but 5,070 complaints in 26 months is an average of 2,340 per year. So yes, higher than normal. But let's look at the first chart again. Did you notice that it left out 2018 with no explanation? What about the fact that it leaves out January to March? So let's add those back in and add the months that we have data for in 2023 and then look at the average complaints per month for each of those years so that we can compare apples to apples. If you do that, you get this. Immediately you can see that 2022 and 2023 had fewer complaints per month than 2019. That's a pretty big difference to the council forced to act after complaints skyrocket claim put out in the press. Also, the dotted line is 183 complaints per month. That's what you get if you divide 2,200 complaints per year, that's what the council says it normally gets, by 12. You can see that 2019 was worse than average, 2022 was average, and 2023, so far, has been much better than average. The council could claim that that's just a seasonal thing. After all, this doesn't include 2023's summer data. We also don't have full data for all of the seasons, so again, we'll divide the latest data by season and then get monthly averages. Here's what that looks like. What a different story. If you were in charge of writing this report and wanted the buskers to look bad, you could first lie about how good things used to be, then group all the complaints from the last 2 years into one lump sum and put that up top. But if you wanted to be honest about what was actually happening, you'd give people the context first, explaining why external factors and not buskers are the likely cause of the initial bump in complaints. Then you'd show that the rate of complaints was average last year and below average this year. And if you really wanted to dig down, you'd mention that complaints went down every season for an entire year and that complaints have been way below average since autumn 2022. That's the truth, and yet the council simply put, there was a notable increase in complaints related to busking. In the report, it states that it is important to inform buskers that they may need to obtain a Performing Rights Society license. The council should provide an advisory section within the policy relating to the liability associated with royalties, and that this rests solely with the licensed busker. It's a little confusing and the typos don't help, but basically the council's saying that it's up to buskers within Westminster's busking programme to pay for a license to perform copyrighted music during their shows. Well, that's a little weird, isn't it? No busker has ever been sued for playing copyrighted music, and buskers being legally protected in their own actions seems to have little to do with reducing complaints. Why is this one of the 17 changes that the report's authors make? So, I asked an employee of PRS why he thought Westminster included this. He told me on the phone that this was a question for their local authorities team, and he'd forward them my question. They never got back to me, so I emailed Hayley Bosher, a reader in intellectual property law and associate dean at Brunel University, London. Bosher produces Whose Song Is It Anyway?, a podcast devoted to issues surrounding intellectual property law and music, and is the author of a book titled Copyright in the Music Industry, a practical guide to exploiting and enforcing rights. We organised a phone call. On it, I told her the council's position. She called that position completely wrong. She explained that PRS charges local authorities for the use of live music on busking pitches. The moment the council demarcated when and where buskers could perform, they'd essentially created a busking venue and should have started paying the local authorities' tariff, and that's £10.93 per day. As for the buskers themselves, PRS say, buskers who perform in the designated areas need to report each performance to receive a royalty fee for each busking session. To be clear, if a busker performs on a pitch created by a council, PRS will pay that busker for providing their music to the public, £1.47 per show. In other words, the music license fees that councils pay PRS are redistributed to the street performers who busk on their pitches. The council's position is not just entirely backwards, it robs buskers of the money that's lawfully and rightfully theirs. Which presents us with two really distasteful options. Why has the council's legal team got a clearly written law so wrong? The first option is incompetence. Maybe the council's lawyer simply didn't understand the above. I don't believe that. There's no grey area here. The law is clear. The other option is they're lying. Obviously, I'm not in the heads of the report's authors, but I can only think of one persuasive reason for them to lie, is that the council is trying to save money. Now, £10.93 isn't much per day, but as of writing this, the regime has been active for 880 days. Multiply that by 26 pitches, and by now they should have spent £250,078. If the council has avoided paying the PRS licence, then they have effectively stolen over £250,000 and counting from the UK's musicians. The report uses the exact phrase illegal busker 39 times to describe performers who haven't got their legally mandated licence. To save time, and because I'm not petty, I won't refer to Westminster as the illegal council from now on. I could. Presumably the report's authors would agree that I should. Especially as it doesn't seem to be the only crime that the council has been committing here. On the application form to get a licence, it asks performers to state their union membership status. According to every legal service and advisory body I could find, it's highly unethical for an authority to ask such a question. According to a high-ranking union rep I got in touch with, unrelated to busking but familiar with the law, it is plainly illegal to make decisions based on whether or not someone has trade union membership, so asking that question is at best pointless, and at worst a crime that could lead to legal actions being taken against the council. Also, according to the protections enshrined in the Data Protection Act of 2018, union membership status is regulated under Conditions for Sensitive Processing. The council has no need, right, or incentive to know if a busker is a member of a union, so storing that data might be a crime even if they don't act upon it. Here are a couple of sentences taken from the report's executive summary talking about how the council views its own efforts. The original intention of the scheme was to have a light touch approach, emphasizing self-regulation based on a code of conduct, and later that the policy was an effort to establish a light touch licensing regime with the aim of self-regulation. A light touch, self-regulated regime. Cool, so let's start with self-regulation. I think we can all agree that there is regulation and self-regulation. Regulation, in this case, would include the application rules, stating who is eligible for a license, and the terms under which you can get your license suspended, like busking in the wrong place. If you don't have a license, you'll be busking illegally, and if you go against the terms, you'll lose your license. The regulations state that illegal busking can lead to you being fined, taken into custody, or have your equipment confiscated. All the above clearly falls under the heading regulation. As for self-regulation, the council has provided a voluntary code of conduct to follow. It says that buskers should hold public liability insurance of at least £2 million, don't use dangerous props, don't bring unlicensed animals to accompany you, only busk between the hours of 10 AM and 9 PM, avoid being too loud, don't power amps with external power sources, be aware that noise can be generated by the audience, never obstruct property entrances or exits or pavements, cooperate with requests by authorized officers and the police, only sell merch if you have permission, make sure that no one could trip over your equipment or leave it unattended, respect other buskers and cooperate with any queuing system they have, talk to the council and the local community and use the forum, don't busk for longer than 40 minutes with a 20-minute break, and have a full and varied repertoire. In actual fact, the first 11 items on that list are part of the policy and application process. There's nothing voluntary about them. It's only the last 5 that are voluntary. When the council says that it was intended that the scheme would be self-regulating, unfortunately this has not been the case, are they talking about these 5 points? Because there isn't a single complaint between 2017 and 2019 about respect between buskers or unattended equipment. As for point 3, it was up to the council to implement the forum, and they decided not to. The 40-minute show, 20-minute break rule shouldn't be there at all. In the first draft of the policy, this used to be in the license conditions, but so many buskers complained about this specific point that the council agreed to take it out. It's probably an oversight that it has somehow remained in the Code of Conduct, which means that the only thing in the Code of Conduct that could be considered self-regulating or important is that last point, having a full and varied repertoire. Is that really what the report means when they say that the licensing regime was supposed to be self-regulating? All the other things they complain about are either irrelevant or literal crimes by the terms of the policy. I'm not sure what else is left up to the busker. Talking of crimes, calling the licensing regime light touch is just as misleading. First of all, the policy limits legal busking to just 26 pitches. All of those 26 pitches add up to a combined 207 square meters of floor space where it is legal to busk in a borough with an area of 21.47 million square meters. The statement then that the policy is not light touch because it has made it a crime to busk in Westminster is, therefore, only 99.999% correct. They don't even make the pitches big enough when there's tons of space. Here's a photo of the northeast pitch in Leicester Square. The entire show has to fit into that circle. Every instrument, every dancer, every prop, as well as the performer's equipment case, amplifier, and whatever else they use. What you're looking at is one of only 5 pitches in the entire borough where amplification is allowed, and it is tiny. Still, while limited space might be an issue, limited time is what makes this license completely untenable. Between the 26 pitches in Westminster's scheme, there are a maximum of 267 hours on which to busk per day. That might sound like a lot, but Leicester Square and Trafalgar Square are often closed for events, knocking that figure down to 246 hours. Take off another 5% for London's famously bad weather. That's a complete guess, by the way, but every estimate I've gotten from buskers is even worse. And you're left with just 233 hours of licensed pitch time per day. There are something like 600 street performers busking in Westminster. You can see how I got to that decision in the appendix accompanying this video, but there are a few ways of getting to that figure. Equally shared out, each of those 600 performers could perform daily for about 23 minutes on licensed pitches. However, there are only 5 pitches in Westminster that allow amplification. One of them, the council decided, should go on a traffic island in the middle of a 2-lane roundabout, a placement so dangerous that buskers have to stop performing the moment they get a crowd. Another amplified pitch was placed all the way out in an unpopular location in Marble Arch, a pitch that's so low earning that nobody uses it. That leaves just 3 viable amplified pitches. This means that, on average, each busker would get just 2.4 minutes of amplified licensed pitch time per day, or a full 40-minute show once every 2.5 weeks. Busking on 99.999% of council land, with or without a license, is a crime. Not adhering to their rules is a crime. There's neither enough time nor space to perform. The license all but eliminates amplification, and everything is backed with the threat of arrest and having the tools of your livelihood confiscated. If that's light touch, I dread to think what else the council was considering.